Thank you everybody for coming out on this Friday. This is the KI Community Forum. Normally this forum is called the Job Creation Forum. We talk about the economic climate and people's struggles with it, and also talk about solutions. But tonight we're switching it up. So thank you for coming out to talk about transit-oriented development. This is surprising to see so many people here to talk about transit-oriented development. It doesn't seem like it would be very exciting, but thank you for coming out on this Friday. So we have our panelists tonight, Ron, and he's gonna give a quick intro, or not a quick intro, but he's gonna introduce everybody to what TOD is and just give some more detail about the initiative. Carlos Kamel, he's an advocate, community advocate of TOD, and also TOD in relation to community. And Rasul Palmer is a student here and an intern at the KI Eco Center. And his role tonight, he can speak more about this, is to be an active listener. And then also, he's going to share some of the insights he gained from reading an article about TOD and how it can be equitable. So, thank you for coming out. Woo-hoo. Well, there's a handout. I'm not familiar with what's all on the handout. Ryan can speak. Ryan can speak more to that.
So before Ron starts, what I really want to do is I want to extend our gratitude to KI for having this forum. Obviously, this is folded into KI's regular job forum, but to have it specific on TOD, and we've had a couple meetings leading up to this point, Ron and KI's team. So one thing that we do know for certain about this conversation, that it is designed to be an ongoing conversation, that this is one of a series of conversations, not just around job creation, but also around transit-oriented development. This is a long process, and tonight, as you start to hear bits and pieces of how this plan is and how it's coming together, that as we move into our constantly further discussions, they'll be drilling down a little bit more specificity. So we're trying to kind of give the summary piece tonight, kind of talk about where things are at, get as much input as we can, and then based upon that that next conversation, we'll be looking at more specific focus stuff. But tonight, it's just kind of that overall summary. And for us, it's really about education. And engagement is important, but for us, it's about education, because there has to be a lot of education about what this means and what that impact looks like. And really what's important is making sure that the community, for the lack of a better description, becomes versed in what does this mean, so that everyone can make an educated decision about where do they stand on this possibility and hopefully this eventual reality. But once again, we do want to thank KI. I do, for the time not being there. So, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ron.
Thanks, Carlos. I want to echo Carlos's words of gratitude to him and the staff here at KI. We've had some great conversations so far, and the ability to sit in really this kind of an intimate setting with all of you and to talk about this plan and to begin a dialogue is really great. So thanks for spending some time on Friday with us. So my name is Ron Gifford, and I work for a nonprofit organization called the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, which is really a regional group of companies. And a lot of what we do and what the initiatives we're involved with are all about is about economic growth in the region. And transit is one of the issues that we're focusing on, because we really do see a direct correlation and a direct connection between transit and good transit options and job creation and economic growth and economic development. That's really why we've gotten involved with this. So what I'd like to do is kind of quickly run through a proposal that's been developed over the last few years, talk about some of the planning that's gone into that, talk about where we are in terms of the process of being able to move forward with this, because to do some of the things we'd like to do, and that I'll talk about here in a moment, we need approval from our legislature to be able to get some of the tools that we'd like in order to really begin a more robust community conversation about what sort of transit investments we should make here. So I'm going to go through this quickly, but I don't want this to just be a soliloquy here on my part. So if you've got questions or comments and the like, I'd encourage you just to jump in and let's make this as two-way interactive as possible. And as I go through and talk about the process a little bit, you'll start to get a sense of where additional community engagement and input is going to be required and necessary in this process, and why it's so important to begin these conversations like the one we're beginning today. So we start from the perspective that Indianapolis really needs better transit options. As you know, we're served today by Indigo, and while Indigo does a good job with the resources it has, the challenge it has, frankly, is it doesn't have sufficient resources. And as a result, what we have is we have a limited number of routes, but more importantly, we have limited service on those routes. And you know well, I suspect, if you've tried to use Indigo, that it's not the most convenient service in the world because it doesn't run the frequency. And the key to a good transit system is, in theory, it's pretty simple, right? A good transit system gets you where you want to go, when you want to get there. A good transit system is a tool for you to live your life. And you don't have to live your life around the transit schedule. It lets you get where you want to go, when you want to get there. Well, we don't have that today. We don't have the level of frequency. We don't have the level of service. Now, one of the other challenges that we have is that the Indigo bus service stops at the Marion County borders. Service doesn't extend out into the other counties. So if you're interested in employment, for example, if you're interested in getting a job in Hendricks County or up in Hamilton County, you can't get there if you choose, or if you need or choose to ride on the Indigo service. You can't do that today. So it's a very limited option, and you see some of the statistics on the slide about where we rank in terms of our competitor cities and the like. One of the other data points on this, and why this is so important and so critical from a job creation and a job access perspective. Today in Marion County, 7% of working adults lack access to a car. They don't have reliable transportation readily available. Another stat that's not up there, 15% of households where there are two working adults share one car, only have one car. So if you and your spouse, or you and your partner, or you and your roommate are going separate directions, you obviously understand the challenge that creates if you're only sharing one car. The other thing, if you live in a community like ours and it requires you essentially to have a car or to have two cars, that's imposing a $9,000 a year cost on you. AAA says it costs on average about $9,000 to own and operate a car, once you factor in car payments, insurance, operating, maintenance, etc. Parking fees that go along with that. So think about that. If you could reduce the number of cars you had to have in your household by one, $9,000 directly into your pocket. That's economic development by any definition. We also don't want this to be our transportation future. So by being a community that is car dependent, we also become a community that is road dependent. Roads are great, don't get me wrong. This isn't about either investing in roads or investing in good transit. You have to invest in both, and part of that's because good transit operates on good roads. But we don't want this to become our only possibility of how we get around. We think better transit options benefit the region in at least three specific ways. One, it's about creating jobs. It's about attracting more jobs. As companies are starting to look around and decide where do they want to expand, where do they want to invest more, where do they want to bring operations, they want to go to a community where it's easier for their workers to get to and from work. That's why creating options for workers in terms of a better transit system is so critical to the success of a good community. Secondly, it's going to spur growth and development in our neighborhoods. This is transit-oriented development. Somebody asked me once for a good example of transit-oriented development, and I would point to College Avenue as a historic example in our community of TOD. Why is it you start at 38th Street, for example, and head north on College? You think about 38th, 42nd, 46th, 52nd, 56th. At each of those intersections, there are shops, restaurants, little commercial nodes. Why is that? It's because back in the day when we had streetcars running throughout Indianapolis, those were streetcar stops. And every place the streetcar stopped, business, retail, a little commercial sector built up, because that tended to be where people lived, or that's where people were getting off as they were going throughout the community. So College Avenue is a historic rendering of transit-oriented development. It's the same concept today. You build good transit corridors, you put stations in place, and it's going to spur development around it. And then finally, we talked about this a little bit already, it provides better access throughout the community. Jobs, healthcare, educational opportunities, cultural activities, places of worship, or just going and hanging out with your friends someplace. So good transit gives you that option. This is going to be a video I was going to show you, but I'm going to skip it because we couldn't get the sound to work. If you go to our website, which is indyconnectnow.com, and you'll see that at the end of the slides as well. All of these videos are uploaded and linked there. So over the last few years, a group of planners and folks from the private sector, from the public sector, working with neighborhood and community organizations, literally hundreds of meetings throughout the community talking about this, have come up with a proposal of what a better transit system might look like for Indianapolis, and we call it the Indy Connect Plan. And the first phase of that, which is designed to be built out over the next 10 years, has really sort of three primary elements to it. The first is that it'll double the amount of local bus service in Marion County, and it'll extend that bus service into the other counties that join into the plan. So instead of being stopped at the county line, you'll be able to move in between communities in the region. So the backbone of this whole system is taking our existing bus service and doubling the service and the frequency on these routes so that it better serves us. The second thing is the addition of 5 rapid transit lines, and on the map and on the handout that you have, these are reflected by the colors on the map. The red, blue, green line are currently being studied. That is, planning and engineering firms are looking at where the specific routes should be, what kind of technology, what kind of vehicles should be used there. I'll talk about that more in a minute. And then the purple and the orange lines, so the next 2 lines we'll start studying we'll start on those as soon as these studies stop or are concluded on these first 3 lines. And then finally, express bus service in between job centers. So to get from downtown out to Park 100, for example, or out to Castleton to Fishers, up to Noblesville, out to Plainfield, to all the logistics firms out in Plainfield, so you can get to places like Brightpoint, Amazon.com, places like that. The notion about express buses is they're limited stops, so it gets you there quickly, and that's if you're a commuter, you're trying to get to work. You want to try to get there as quickly as possible, not have a 2.5 hour commute like you might have today on local bus service. So I want to talk a little bit about local bus service and what this means in terms of expansion. A lot of numbers on here, I'm not going to go over all of them, but highlight a couple that are important. Today we have 30 bus routes, we'll have 39 under this plan, but more importantly, today there's 122 buses that run on Indigo during peak service. We'll have 301, we round it to 300 buses running under this plan when it goes into effect. Today there are no Indigo buses that run, there are no routes that run on frequency less than 10 minutes, meaning the bus shows up every 10 minutes or less. We have 0 today. There'll be at least 9 routes in the new plan. Those will be the major corridors and the major thoroughfares. Today there's 3.5 routes. I don't know where the half comes from. These are Indigo's numbers. 3.5 routes, and what I think that means is that it's a part-time, maybe during rush hour, it runs more frequently and less so otherwise. 3.5 routes today that run every 15 minutes or less, so that 10 to 15 minute window. We'll have 12 routes that run in that frequency under the new plan. And then we'll have fewer routes. This is a good thing in my view. We'll have fewer routes that run every 30 minutes. Today, that's the norm, right? So we'll have fewer routes. And then you'll see in terms of the number of hours, today the buses in total every year run about 440,000 hours of service. That'll be more than double, over 1 million hours of service. So this is the local bus backbone. So this is all about frequency, right? Improving that, making it more meaningful for folks. When I talk about rapid transit, it used to be you had two options in transit. You had local bus service, or you could go light rail, subways, things like that. But over the last handful of years, the bus companies and the like have begun building these vehicles, these rapid transit vehicles. So every picture you see up here, these are essentially light rail vehicles on rubber tires. The only difference between these vehicles and light rail vehicles, light rail uses steel wheels, these use rubber tires. Now there's a lot of other differences. The flexibility of these and the ability to use these on city streets. So you want to build a light rail line, that's great, but you're locked in. Wherever you put it, that's where it is. And it costs as much as $100 million a mile to build light rail. These vehicles run on the streets, and the plan is to, throughout this study, to identify the right corridors and the right streets, and then you dedicate lanes where you can. By the way, this is what they look like on the inside. The pull up to the station, something that's called level boarding. So the station and the bus are the same. They pull up, the doors open on the side, you walk right in. So if you're in a wheelchair, if you're pushing a stroller, if you're rolling your bicycle, or if you just don't want to climb stairs, these vehicles make it so much easier to get on and off. You buy your ticket at these permanent stations that get set up along the way. No longer wait in line, have to go through the front door, put a crumpled dollar into the money changers. Doesn't work that way anymore. You get smart cards, or you buy your ticket at the station, go right on, go right off. This is in Cleveland. So in Cleveland, they built one of these rapid transit corridors. It's called the Health Line. And it's been incredibly successful. It's been open since 2008. It really is a model for a lot of us, and we've learned a lot from looking at Cleveland and some other communities, and to bring this to Indianapolis as a proposal. Part of the reason for doing it is the cost effectiveness of doing this. So this is not cheap to do all of this, but the benefits. So this plan is going to cost to build it out. Please buy the vehicles, do the road improvements that are necessary, and all of that. We project this to be about $1.3 billion over 10 years. And we think at least half of that we'll get through federal grants. So that's bringing $600 million or more into the community to support new jobs here in terms of construction and the like. And then the rest of it will get paid for by existing revenue, so fares, the fares that people will pay to use the bus, use the system. Some grants that come today from the state. But there's a gap. We've got to fill a gap in terms of that funding source. And so we're proposing an additional increase in the local tax. This is how other communities fund their transit system, is through a local tax. And so our proposal is to increase our existing local income tax by 0.3%. Today in Marion County, the income tax is 1.62%, I think. So we're proposing an increase of 0.3, dedicated solely to fund this transit system. And that covers not only the build out, the capital build out, but will cover the operating cost of this system over the next 25, 30 years, based on all the planning and the like that's been done. We can't do this on our own, though, today. That's why we're talking about a bill at the General Assembly, and that's why you're reading about that in the paper today. I talked about this local tax. It actually, today there are several different kind of local taxes, and there's actually capacity in some of those existing taxes, but we're not allowed under state law to use them for transit. So the taxes that we could use for transit we're capped out on, so there's no capacity. And the taxes where there are capacity, we can't use for transit. It's crazy, but it is what it is. So we're asking the General Assembly to give us that flexibility. Now this isn't something new. We're not asking them to do something they haven't done before. They've given this flexibility to 15 other counties over the years to fund local needs. So we're just asking for the same kind of flexibility that they've given to other communities. So that's this first bullet point up here. Give us flexible ability to use our existing local funds. Secondly, we think this is a serious enough question, an important enough question, that the voters should weigh in on it. That this should be put to the public in the form of a voter referendum, and let the public decide whether this is an investment we want to make or not. We do this with school capital projects that are of a significant size, and so we think this is a chance for the community to weigh in. And then finally, because we're creating a new structure, we're creating a new regional transit authority, the idea is this will span counties, multiple counties will be able to participate. Because of that, it's important that everybody know the rules going in. And so that the structure is set out in statute. Everybody understands how the equities will play out, how people's respective interests will be respected and taken advantage, or not be taken advantage of. So it's sometimes important to say what we're not asking for. We're not asking the General Assembly to approve this plan for us. We're not asking legislators from around the state to weigh in and tell us what we should do. We're simply asking them to be able to make our own decisions. We're not asking the state for any money. We've said, look, we'll fund this ourselves. We'd like the opportunity to have that conversation, have that ability here. So we're not asking the state to pay for it. Because frankly, the state won't pay for it anyway. So there's no reason to ask. And finally, we're not asking anybody to be forced to join this or to participate in this. We're saying each county gets to make its own decision. So, here in Marion County, our local elected officials will consider this. We'll decide to put it on the ballot or not put it on the ballot for us to vote. And every other county will be able to have the same ability. But Hendricks County, if they're not ready, if they don't want to become part of this right away, we're not going to try to force them to join. When it's a good idea for them, then they'll have the chance to come into the system. But we're not trying to force anybody to do this. Here's the timeline of how this might work. So if the General Assembly, which they're in session now, right, they'll go through the end of April, that's when this session will run. So if we get this legislation passed, then the next thing that happens is we get to have about a 16 to 18 month community conversation. It really starts with discussions like this, where we sit down and we really start to get into the nitty-gritty of this planning stage, and we start asking, is this the right plan? Does this make sense? We're getting already lots of good feedback about this throughout the community. Well, what about here? What about there? Does this make sense in terms of meeting the community's need and the like? And then this plan gets finalized. And eventually what happens then is we'll be able to go to the polls in November of 2014 at the general election and be able to vote on the plan and to be able to weigh in. And if the voters approve it, we'll be able to immediately start working on this at the beginning of 2015 with a timeline that has much of what I showed you in terms of the map, the green line, the red line, or the red line, the blue line, the expansion of the Indigo service and all of that, built out in a substantial way in the first 5 years. So that by the time Indianapolis celebrates its bicentennial as a city in 2020, we'll have the beginnings of a world-class transit system that allows this world-class city to continue to grow, continues to allow our neighborhoods to take advantage of this infrastructure now, and for those neighborhoods to begin to grow and to develop, and for the folks who live here to begin to take advantage of that, the same way people in cities all over the country are able to do now, and add jobs, create jobs, and allow people to really fully embrace and take advantage of the opportunities that are presented. So that's the quick overview. Here's our website. A lot of what I just said is on the website in terms of the details. So if you're interested in more of the details of the plan. So that's kind of the proposal, that's the process that we're currently working on. I think Carlos is going to now kind of kick off kind of a discussion about, all right, that's all great, Ron, but what does this really mean? Let's get granular. What does this mean in terms of neighborhood development, and what, and more importantly, what are those kinds of things neighborhoods need to start doing in order to be prepared to take advantage of this opportunity as it presents itself?
So about 3 years ago, right? This is before I met Ron, and somewhere around the time when we started doing all this quality of life stuff, in my own independent research, I kind of discovered this wonderful site called Policy, right? And if you guys get a chance, you should go in there. You should really look at some of the stuff that they produce. There's a lot of forward thinking. Policy link, right? There's a lot of forward thinking. And part of the reason I was doing that was because I was really trying to investigate what does it mean to be sustainable communities? What does it mean to what does this idea of sustainability really mean? And how does that happen at a real granular level? How does it happen on day-to-day movement and ideas and conversations? So, I started reading all this stuff around TOD, right, Trans-Organic Development. And that was just kind of, at that point, it was kind of a cursory conversation, very, very preliminary. So it wasn't something that we were really discussing a lot. But I was very excited about it. I was so excited about it that I started creating my own file about it, started building all this stuff that I can get on it. And for me, the things that really that drove me was the fact that I'm not from Indianapolis, I'm from England, I'm from London, right? And I spent 15 years in New York City. And so I have an intimate understanding, an intimate relationship with transit and how it works and how it services all citizens from all different cultures and from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, right? To me, from my experience in London and from being in New York, it was the place where you sat down on a train. The person that you could be sitting next to could be making $5,000 a year, or could be making $500,000 a year, and you wouldn't be none the wiser. And more often than not, you could get into a conversation with someone on the train because there must have been someone else who was doing some foolishness, and you'll end up kind of connecting in a particular way. And you probably may never see that person again. Or what end up happening? On the end of the day, when you're on your way home, you bump to that same person again, right? And you recognize where they get off. They get off at 72nd Street. They'll be doing okay, right? Right, because I'm going all the way to the Bronx. But it was one place where it flattened the structure. So when I started to hear these conversations taking place around TOD for Indianapolis, obviously it was that experience that kind of pulled me into the conversation. But the thing that really drew me about trying to get into this, to break into this piece, it's not, and I was just thinking when Ron was doing his presentation, I was like, yeah, that's great, that is nuts and bolts, yeah, we need to know how to pay for it, but there's another real conversation, right? And that is, how does that affect communities, particularly communities that are on the margin, right? That do not have access to a car, who need access for jobs in order to get to work, and are trying to figure out how to manage their day-to-day. So from the stuff that I've read, there are real significant benefits around transportation-oriented development, specifically around how it's designed and around where stops are, right? Job creation, creating economic vitality for those particular neighborhoods where there are specific stops. But there's also a larger piece of this, right? Most times when this type of opportunity comes along, people are either born into it because it's there already. You never have an opportunity to be part of shaping this and looking at how can that really affect our respective communities. So when Ron and I met and we started having a conversation about it, he was very, very gracious. After he made his presentation, I went up to him and I said, that's great, but I think you missed some of the most important pieces, and that is, if Mary Smith wants to get behind TOD, she needs to figure out how does that impact her life and her day-to-day work. So I think that is the most important piece. How does that affect me? What does that benefit to me? How does that make my life easier? How does that help me save money? And how does that present opportunities, if not for me, for my son or my daughter going forward? So the light bulb goes off in my head, and I'm looking at $1.3 billion over 10 years, and right away I'm saying, okay, this is an opportunity for a couple of things. One, it is about creating jobs, but it's also about the question is, how do we prepare our young men and women to be recipients and beneficiaries of this project? I think that's a fundamental piece. What is the pathway that we can create to inject them into this so they can prepare not just so much to be the recipients of it, but to help build it, right? That we're going to need engineers, we're going to need urban planners, right? We're going to need conductors, we're going to need maintenance people. How do we prepare people to prepare for that? So I think there's that piece. But then there's also, how does that also tie in to current economic and social development that's taken places in Mid-North, in places like Martindale, Brightwood, on the northwest side, places like Cafe on the northeast side. How do we get those connectivities to take place? So part of that is, in my estimation, was really bringing the conversation at a real, for lack of a better description, at a street level, right? That we need to kind of get these nuts and bolts around how much this costs, but the real question is, how do we inject ourselves into this conversation so that we know that those surrounding communities, where there is a possibility for a stop, can start benefiting from it. Now the research is out there, right? It's there. It says that wherever there is a stop, right? You're looking at anywhere from, you can look at a quarter mile, you can look at a half mile, and that density around it, there's real benefit, right? It brings in money. It helps local businesses grow. It becomes a destination, right? So now people are not running through there. It's a place where people actually stop, where they're looking for coffee, where they may want to have a cafe, where they want to meet for maybe drinks. The other piece about it, which I think is really critical, and this is something that I think as we start to drill down as in respective communities and residents, is it really does support pedestrian-oriented development. It does support the idea that you could get up, you can walk to a local cafe that is going to be close to where you are. And if you choose on that day not to drive, you don't have to look at the bus schedule. You know that, I'm not driving today. Or if I don't feel well enough and I don't want to be behind the wheel, but if I could jump on the train and get to where I need to be, fantastic. Or better yet, if you have car trouble, 9 times out of 10, if you don't have a friend, particularly in communities that are on the margin, right? right? Maybe 50% of the people with communities on the margin, A, may not have a vehicle, and B, are carpooling. And in some cases, one person's schedule doesn't fit the other. But it does present the opportunity that you can have access to that job in Greenwood, to that job in Plainfield, to that job in Hamilton County, and not feel like I'm not going to do it because it's going to take me 2.5 hours to get there, which means I basically have to get up. That's an hour getting ready. So that's 3 hours in the morning to get there, and then 3 hours, and then another 2.5 hours to get back. So we're looking at 5.5 hours just in travel historically. That we could cut that down, hopefully, to maybe an hour if that's the case. And we stretched it out a little bit further in this conversation, right? And so part of this is we have to be possibilists, right? We have to look at what we can do within that opportunity. We started to think about, as this rolls out, how do we connect that to real-time education, for young women and men, that they could see this as practical learning opportunities, around, I remember when I was in school, right, and you hear this all the time, math, why would I need geometry, why would I need physics, it's not gonna mean anything to me. But if we could connect that excitement around getting people to figure out, well, how does this thing work, how are they building that, it becomes a real connection between taking our young men and women and saying, this is something that you could be a part of as learning for current events, but also it gets them to start thinking more about placemaking within their communities. So those are those pieces. I'm going to go just a couple more because there's a lot of examples around this in Denver and in Los Angeles, and even in Seattle. There was when the idea of light rail or TOD was brought to the forefront for these communities, and they got past the education piece and they got it and they understood it. The question was, okay, how does this affect us? And when they figured that stuff out, then the question was equitable development, right? This stuff comes in. There's been a history of when you build out transit lines like this. Historically, what happens? The value of the land increases, right? Housing values go up. The big chain businesses or mid-sized businesses want to go into those communities, right? And then there's this attraction of folks who want to come in, and yeah, the neighborhood's going to change, but for lack of a better description, historically where there has been TOD, there has been gentrification. And so in Seattle, Los Angeles, Denver, there's a number of communities where they asked them, for the lack of a better description, pump the brakes, right? Hold on for a minute. And the question was, how does this benefit us? So in some cases, right, in some of these cities, they developed what was called a community benefits agreement, right? Which is, on one level, while it may be a legal binding document between developers and planners and community residents to say, when this is being built, or when this is being built out, that X amount of jobs, right, will be created for X amount of people in this community, possibilities, right? We want to make sure that X amount of revenue can continue to be supported and floated through this community. So that was one piece where they were able to get some real significant benefits out of it. And some of that stuff is down the road. I think the fundamental piece for us as community residents, as individuals who may have some experience with transit, right, whether it's Chicago or whatever, is to understand what's critical for our families, and also understand how that could, right now, whether we go through, CBA or nonprofit led approach to kind of make sure that communities kind of do well, but understand that there is an opportunity to save money and to put money back into our family. This $9,000 that's being spent, in car maintenance, that's $9,000 that we could have for something else. It could go to a child's college education. It could go into savings. Some of that could become discretionary fund. It could be the beginnings of a down payment on a new home that as your family grows. So there's opportunities there. And my final point before we move on is I've become very fond of Indianapolis in the 5 years that I've been here, right? And recognizing that Indianapolis has its challenges, right? And I think one of the challenges is that it wants to feel like a small town, but it wants to be recognized as a big city, right? It wants to hold on to these traditional huge values, but it wants to play in the big leagues with the Chicagos and the New Yorks, and the DCs. And that means we have to change our, it's going to require Hoosiers to kind of change their thinking a little bit. But Indianapolis is in a really good place to be what I would call a contender as a city. And folks have to cut through here if they choose to get to Chicago. And I have a vision that folks want to go to Chicago, but they get here, they say, you know what, I'm happy right here, right? I mean, it's this sense that I was on my way to what I thought was a big city, but I found a big city with a place I could feel like home. But in order for that to happen, in order for Indianapolis, I believe, to be that contender, right? And there's notoriety now. I mean, I'd have to say, the Super Bowl put Indianapolis in a particular place, and I guarantee you, we will get a Super Bowl again. But for Indy to be a contender, and I think for young and even elderly people to kind of stay here to see this as a place that they can move around and have viability, we need to have some form of mass transit that people could know that it is reliable. Because it's interesting, Ron didn't show this slide, but there's some studies that have been done, and for adults between the ages of 18 and 34, and they are not making decisions based on where the jobs are. They're making decisions on where is it that they want to live and what those amenities are, and then we can figure out where my job is, right? We live in an age of mobility, right? It's I want to live in a place that gives me what I need, and then I'll figure out where the work is. And I think Indianapolis has an opportunity to grasp that. I think the other thing which I'm very, very adamant about is you create an opportunity for individuals who are in communities that are on the margin. And I think between the quality of life plans that we have going on right now in Indianapolis, between the reconnecting the waterways piece, right, and this place-making piece around getting people to kind of get there and understand that is a place that you can go and find some serenity and peace and still understand that there's a connectivity. I think this is the right time to pull all these pieces together, and that's why I've kind of been pushing this forward and supporting this mechanism. So on that note, questions, comments, or proposals?
Well, I saw two of these points I found that I wanted to ask you. I found two of the points I want answers to, and you see the answer to. See the answer to the questions for that. My first question was, how was community managers going to benefit from this program? Can you explain how it is specifically?
Can everybody hear you?
No. Just speak up.
Yell at us, Russell.
Just scream.
My first question was, one of my questions was, how would community members benefit from this program, the transit project? I knew there would be some benefits, but I wanted some examples, like would this provide jobs for community members? What way would they do that? Carlos here answered the question. Thank you very much for that. Our next question was, why did you plan that type of design for the transit system? For the red line, blue line, blue line, green line. What made you decide on this type of transit system like that?
Yeah.
Did you guys know that?
So the question is why this particular design? I'm going to flip back up to this map, and you have copies of this. It's all a balancing act, a balancing act of sorts. Right? And you start first. We've got the existing bus system, and those routes have been established over the years. A lot of the current Indigo bus routes are based on the old streetcar line routes, so it goes back 100 years. Now, some of those routes work really well because, Washington Street has continued to be a corridor with business and the like. Some of them don't work so well because our neighborhoods have shifted, and so over time there are parts of the community that have grown up, but our transit service hasn't grown up with them. So the first analysis really was, where are the places people want to go? So you really start and you look at, well, where are people? Where do people live, and where do people want to go in terms of where the jobs are? So, when streetcars were running in Indianapolis in the 1920s and 30s, Park 100, I'm sure those were farms, right? That was rural. That was rural Indiana on Park 100. So, you know, there really weren't any routes out there and the like. So, where do people want to go? And then the second sort of layer of that analysis was what's the best way to get people there? And what's the most cost-effective way to get people there? So, local bus service is great, except, you know, if the bus stops every block, oh, that'd be great, thanks. If the bus stops every block, it just takes longer to get across town. So that's where you start looking at this question of what's called these rapid transit corridors. How can you move more quickly across the community to get to the places you want to go? Well, then you start looking at these technologies. Well, how about light rail? Well, light rail costs billions of dollars. Oh, guess what? We can't afford that. So what's the next, what's the next option? Thank you. And so it was really kind of that process, Russell, of putting maps, putting lines on a map and doing some cost estimates and saying, well, we can't afford that. And when we say we can't afford that, you try to calculate, well, what would the tax have to be? You have to have additional revenues and the like. And is that going to be politically acceptable? Are people going to be willing to pay that or not pay that? Is that asking too much? And so it's really kind of a balancing act. And so after some of that planning happened and you had some initial ideas, then sort of the first plan, if you will, kind of went out on the road. And they started having meetings just like this all over the community. About 150 or more meetings all over the region. And some were small, kind of more intimate meetings like this, and some were 200 people in a larger auditorium, and getting feedback. And this is a lot different than the first plan that went out, because that input was, whoa, you're not going to the right places. You're not getting to the right place. Originally, there weren't these rapid transit corridors that I'm talking about, and the vehicles I showed you pictures of. That wasn't part of the design. So that's how the planning process.
I have a question. Is this red line, is that Meridian Street? That red line?
Well, it's not Meridian Street, although it could be Meridian Street. Well, I mean, I'm not trying to be cute by that. The planning process is continuing.
So
I understand that, but the way you have it depicted here, is that Meridian Street?
Oh, no. So on the map, actually, we deliberately put it between Meridian and College.
Okay,
Not meaning that it's on Central, but
yeah.
But because what we have to figure out now, so the blue line is easy, right? Washington Street's easy. The purple line, 38th Street, that's easy. Keystone's the orange line, well, that's easy. The green line's pretty easy because that's an old abandoned rail corridor, so that exists. Red line is hard. Right, it's harder, right? Because when you think about starting from downtown and coming north, what, should it be West Street, Illinois, Meridian College, Central, right? What's the best corridor coming up? Coming up here, and this is all, so this is part of planning that's happening right now. And in fact, the engineering groups that are doing this will start having community meetings like this to get very specific input. We want to connect, think about coming up, we want to connect IU Health. So, you want to be able to more easily get to, say, IU Health if you either work there or you're a patient there. You want to make sure you can easily get to Ivy Tech with this campus and the growth here and all the students here. I can tell you, Tom Snyder, the president of Ivy Tech, looks at this and he's very clear. He says, we need to make sure that our students have the ability to not only get to and from class, but from class to work and the like.
Well, that leads
Going
to
north, the Children's Museum is really interested.
another
right?
question.
Yeah.
When you're doing all this, what's in place to help people to understand the process? For instance, in New York, Chicago, that has mass transit, people are used to using it. We come from a place where we have the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where they got rid of the rail system purposely to improve the people buying cars. I mean, the people who own the car factories bought the mass transit system to get rid of it so people would buy cars.
That's right.
So there's a whole mentality already here how are you going to train people to understand the use of it in the process of getting to that? You just can't say, okay, here it is. Is there a thing in place where we're going to be taking the bus system now and kind of, you know, putting people into the mindset of using mass transit that's effective and, you know what I'm saying?
Like creating ridership.
Yeah,
Yeah.
creating
Yeah.
ridership. When we were young, you know, kids didn't ride buses. We walked to school or we used mass transit. Well, now we've got all these yellow buses going everywhere.
Right.
Is there a plan to say, okay, we're going to bring these people up so that they understand and have buses for the kids using mass transit so they become users of mass transit?
That's
Please speak to that, but Russell had a few other pieces that he wanted.
Yeah, I read the policy link TOD document or equity and TOD. There's like 3 points I wanted to speak upon. I was interested in them, so I wanted to speak upon them here. One was equity goals on in planning the plan or the vision of the TOD. Well, that explains how the planning of the TOD with with organizations or the community or government agencies should always make sure the benefits of each group are met with equity. That one side gets to even share and another side gets to even share. And that's always one of the main interests of building a transit system like this. That the community members and the government are benefiting of it also. You guys said that, right? That was correct? Our next one is land acquisition. It's when the TOD offers these agencies, a bunch of agencies offer the TOD these lands, proper lands to use for the transit development. What concerned me about that is I wanted to make sure in this one that whatever land is offered to us, that the land that's offered to us is not used by any other facility that is a beneficiary to the community, that brings benefit to the community, our community members or the other government system. Like a school, a community center, or it's a piece of land that's going to be used for a future facility that may bring benefit to the community. Like some form of business, or some form of business or facility. The last one is secure your seat at the table. It explains how community advocates should always be present, always involved in TOD planning meetings like this one. That community advocates should always place the community interest, always make sure the community's interests and benefits are always considered in every single meeting that's planned. And make sure there's no concerns or possible harm to the community like gentrification or other possible causes.
Okay, how does it happen
How does
though
it
in this
happen, though?
process? Like, all of us are familiar with the capital improvements board. So, are we going down that path, or how is this happening?
Can you explain that a little more? Can you explain that a little more?
Well, you said community involvement. Like right now, we have the capital improvements board that does a lot of work with downtown Indianapolis. And here you mentioned we need to create a new governance seat. That was one of your questions, your slide. Going forward, we're going to create a regional governance seat
Right.
for this process. So as part of that, and Carly should mention how there would be an agreement, and I'm not sure how strict that agreement would be.
Well, let me just clarify that. I was saying that is an opportunity that communities have, that as the planning process goes through, this is after, stops
Right,
at the
it's an
side of the pond,
opportunity,
right?
but how do we as community people seize upon that so that, we're talking about, jobs and this, that, and the other, but if you look at this handout, it mentions the Palladium. Now, how many of us are going to the Palladium in 2013?
So let me respond to the how, right? And I do want to say that this is we're so early in this stage that
Which
we
is what's great
have a
about
wonderful
this.
opportunity.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna, as they say, kind of go off the dome, right? In terms of creating the how, right? I think once, so let's just say we have the next level conversation, and that next level conversation is around workshops, like a series of workshops that gets into conversations with engineers, urban planners, the NPO, folks from Connect about where stops should be and why we think they should be there. Not just the standard stops, but things that we think are not going that a stop where we believe can connect to communities currently disconnected, right? So we will drill down on that piece. Then I think the next step would be to look at what are the benefits that can happen from what are the benefits around that stop that we can see. So we start to take a look at how many businesses there are, what type of schools there are, what type of or what there is not, right? And as we're able to attract entities to come in, to kind of, just say for lack of a better description, we can throw Starbucks out there, right? Because they're just one of these employees that you can have a Starbucks in every corner, everyone can get paid, right? But let's just say Starbucks, right? So the question for us would be, as we partner, right? This is the thing about accountability. Accountability is important, but collaboration and working together is critical. So if we worked in partnership with government, with the NPO, right, and with Starbucks, and say, look, this is viable. We certainly believe that we want that to be here because we have a lot of coffee drinkers here, and we think that this will help to kind of grow this economy. But here's the thing, we want you here, but we want to guarantee that 50% of the people who live in this surrounding community will get these jobs, right? So then we have to negotiate that, and so there are ways to do that. So let's just use KI as an example. KI is a non-profit organization. So there's this thing, and this is what Razul was talking to earlier. Right.
317 meeting.
Well, that's what we have a lot of our meetings. So, right. So what Razul was talking about, there's this thing called non-profit LED, and that is where a non-profit organization works with NPOs, which is the Mass Transit, Metropolitan Planning Organization, that would work with Indie Connect, that would work with city government, to broker, for lack of a better description, the deal to say that, you know what, we're going to make sure that residents from Mid-North become beneficiaries of a Starbucks who can come in and or create economic opportunity. At the same token, there's also this other piece about, that station stop is going to create X amount of revenue, it's going to affect housing costs. How do we take some of that and turn it back into the neighborhood so that way we can create opportunity? So there are ways to do that, but the real how is based upon these ongoing conversations right here. Because once we get past the planning piece, right, then it's up to the communities to kind of say, okay, during that planning piece.
Yeah.
During that planning piece is where we get to shape, to be part of shaping that discussion,
So there shouldn't be a
shaping
problem
those
with
benefits.
bringing that up at any point during these
Absolutely,
meetings.
absolutely not. But it was.
Is there language now? Is there language in the beginning phase of transit plan, phase 1 of transit plan that's already, is there language in there that speaks to benefits of residents will be looked at?
Not
always
with
measured?
specificity.
Real quick, I don't mean to cut off, but before we go into a larger Q&A, I just want to do something real quick. Well, first, give a hand for our panelists. Extra round of applause for Russell Palmer. Thank you for not making TOD really, really boring like I thought it was going to be. I was impressed. I was very impressed because that potentially could have gone a whole different direction. So because we have such an intimate group, I think it would be a good thing to kind of go around and everybody introduce themselves, and then also talk briefly, very briefly, about why you're here. Because I think a lot of the questions are going to.
I'm Nicole Martinez LeGrand. I'm the community builder for the North Quality of Life Plan. My office is in the Children's Museum. Why I'm interested in transit-oriented development and POD, things like that, is that it's a major part of the quality of life plan, and I would like to see it come to fruition.
My name is Joyce Moore, and I'm a fourth generation Hoosier who has grown up in this particular area here. And I'm also co-founder of Urban Patch, which is an organization around of self-sustainability. I'm really concerned about gentrification because I've seen what's happened and how we get displaced a lot of times. And I have a son who's an urban planner in New York, and he lives in in Harlem, and I've seen what's happened there. And I'm really concerned, and I'm wanting to make sure that we stay a part of what's going on and we benefit from what's going on and not be displaced as we have in the past.
My name is Grace Mays, and I actually work with Indie Connect now on the grassroots advocacy side. I gather all the volunteers, get the organizations who are interested involved in the process as well. So after taking